There are fixed points in time where things must always stay the way they are. This is not one of them. This is an opportunity, a temporal tipping point. Whatever happens today will change future events, create its own timeline, its own reality. The future pivots around you, here, now, so do good for humanity and for Earth. Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the Series 5 story, The Hungry Earth, and The Cold Blood, written by Chris Chibnall and is directed by Ashley Way. This story is notable for reintroducing to the revived era of the series, the Silurians, or in this story they're called mainly the Homo reptilia. They are a classic Who monster that first appeared in the third Doctor adventure, Doctor Who and the Silurians, with a very similar race appearing in the story The Sea Devils, and then making a return with the Sea Devils in the story Warriors of the Deep, which, fun fact, was actually one of the reasons why Doctor Who got cancelled. So, to say that a popular villain is a bit of an overstatement. However, they do have their fans, and they do have a beloved, and they do have a very particular concept to them. They are a reptilian race that actually were the dominant race of Earth before humans. They're not aliens, they are Earthians like ourselves, only they lived in a prehistory planet, and they thought that a mass catastrophe was going to happen, so they put themselves in suspended animation. However, the catastrophe never came, so they never awoke from their slumber, and humanity was able to evolve from apes on the surface world, and so Silurians kind of lost their right to be on the planet in a sense. And with that, the story introduces a completely new design. Now, whether you like this story at this point is irrelevant, because one of the things that we need to talk about is the redesign of the Silurians, because this design, there's redesigning them and updating it for modern audiences, and then there's just a complete redesign, as a lot of people criticise the introduction of the Silurians in the revived era as feeling, in terms of their appearance, nothing like their classic counterpart. They don't even apart from the fact that they're green, they don't resemble their classic form in any way, shape or form. They've lost their third eye. They don't have they have a much more human face. And we also get to see a lot of a female Silurian, so that's really cool. A lot of people have kind of headcanoned it in a way that they are still Silurians, but this is a separate race of Silurians, an offshoot, which is actually stated in the actual episode itself. So it's not really headcanon, it is actually canon. But because this version of Silurians are usually kept on referred to as Homo reptilia, which they keep trying to push that phrase into this story, which makes them, I think they only say Silurians once through the entire episode, coming to think about it. So a lot of people have considered these versions of the Silurians the Homo reptilia, and then considered the classic Silurians the Silurians, and the Silurians that look like fish people, the Sea Devils, all offsprings of the same race. However, they all have completely different and various designs. This story is actually sort of a direct sequel to sorts of the John Pertwee era, and it has a lot of similarities with that story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's talk about the mass opinion of this story, the mainstream opinion. When this story first aired, a lot of people seem to have liked it. A lot of people praised it as one of the best stories in Series 5, and also as well that it is a return to form to sense. It feels like a love tribute to the classic era, specifically the Third Doctor and Unit era. And a lot of people seem to really enjoy that, despite the controversial redesign of the Silurians. Most people can agree on the fact that the story the story, the narrative itself, did the Silurians justice. It was just the redesign, which is so separated from the original Silurian design, but they may as well be a completely different creature. But apart from that, people like the characters, like the setting, and like the style of the story, which feels much in tune, as I keep saying, to the classic era of the show. However, recently you have people saying not nice things, and I just want to state that most of these people, not everybody, I mean, there are some people who have genuinely criticisms of this, and, you know, that's perfectly fine, but a lot of the criticisms, and a lot of people who are very defensive against this story, it happened right about the time Chris Chibnall took over the show and casted a female doctor. So come up with your own conclusions on them. Not to say, you know, that people only hate this story because it's Chris Chibnall, but I do feel like there's at least some people out there for that reason. But I do know a few people who don't like this story. One of my mates, she really isn't a fan of this story. So I just want to point that out. But, you know, majority of people seem to really enjoy the story and also consider it Chris Chibnall's best script for the series, after his 42 wasn't well received, and his later stories would be equally criticised, but this one story being his standout for the series, and it's also his first script under Stephen Moffat and his first script for Matt Smith. So that's kind of interesting. So onto the story itself. This is a two-parter, with 2 episodes long. Matt Smith's second two-parter, tying after the Weeping Angel two-parter, which also has a reintroduction of a monster, and also as well, with most Stephen Moffat scripts, in the Stephen Moffat era, I should say, the two-parters feel like the setting changes dramatically from part 1 to part 2, to a sense where, like, it gives a nice variety from each episode. You can picture which episode you're thinking of just by the feel and the emotion of it. So that's really cool. So let's get on to the story. We get introduced in the pre-credit sequence to Mo. This man, we get introduced first to Nashri and Tony, these people who are working on this mining facility in this small little village in North Wales, sorry, and they're drilling to try, basically, it's just the reason why they picked North Wales is because there was this weird phenomenon of green grass growing around, this green bluish grass has been growing around in the local area. But the main project is just to see how far they can dig underneath the earth. Basically, it's a vanity project in a sense. But something isn't quite right. And Mo, I guess he's a security guard or something, or he's the miner, but he's part of the night shift. He takes over, and he starts hearing something like an earthquake as the technical stuff goes wrong, and the drill stops, and then suddenly something cracks from the bottom of the earth, which is this, which makes this hole, and there seems to be like this mud, and whatever he puts onto it, it gets sucked up. He tries to collect his torch back by putting his hand in the mud, only for something to grab him and pull him into the mud. Now, this kind of sounds vaguely familiar, the ground eating people. That is because that is sort of the plot to the 5th Doctor story, I believe it's called Frontios. Frontios with the Tractators. There you go, the Tractators. And this is one of the elements of the story, is that it borrows heavily from the classic series, which at one point of the story does kind of become a hindrance and a criticism for the story. But most of these are played very nicely, and the majority of them are part of the John Pertwee era, but there are a few Fifth Doctor references in here as well, with some lines actually taken from The Visitation as well, which is pretty strange, but it's kind of cool as well. And then we get introduced then back to Dr. Amy and Rory, as Rory had joined the team in Vampires in Venice and had a storyline in which him and Amy reconnect after the events of Amy's Choice. So this is a likable connection here. Now let's talk about certain particular aspects of this story. But you see, this story, the Doctor takes Amy and Rory presumably to Rio, but then turns out to be North Wales, where this mining facility is. The day after Mo's disappearance, we learn that this story is taking place in 2020. And we get a scene earlier on where we see Amy and Rory from the future, from a distance, waving at our characters. Why is that so interesting? Well, here's kind of the messed up coincidence of this story. This is a sequel, as I keep stating, to the third Doctor story, Doctor Who and the Silurians. In that story, the Silurians have a deadly virus which can kill the population of the Earth. And the Doctor at one point does state in that story that he will put them back in suspended animation and they will awake in 50 years, which, though that story is technically set in the future from its present day airing, the story was aired in 1970, making 50 years 2020. Strange coincidence, I know. However, you have a story about a plague that you realise that the Silurians have a plague-like technology, and the next time they've been reawakened on Earth in a modern-ish day setting is in the year 2020, where there was a mass pandemic in reality. So, in the Doctor Who canon, was COVID created by the Silurians? That's messed up. You can actually headcanon that, and it oddly and scaredly fits. And you can even make the conclusion that Amy and Rory in the future stayed at their distance, not because of anything messing up with the timeline, because if it was, then they wouldn't have appeared in front of their younger counterparts to begin with, but the fact that they stayed away, so for the far distance, could mean that they were trying to, keep the spread of, they were trying to social distance in. I don't know, it's just it's a fun little nod, and fun little distances. Our characters get separated when our characters are about to head off to this mining, but Rory points out that Amy is wearing her engagement ring, but he wants her to keep it on the TARDIS because it costs a lot of money. And I do like these little moments where it's a way basically to separate Rory from the main cast for a bit. But I do kind of like the scene because Amy is just like, well, I thought you liked my engagement ring. She's wearing it in honour of Rory after the events of Amy's Choice and Vampires in Venice. But Rory doesn't want her to lose it, doesn't want to, he treasures it, so he takes it back to the TARDIS, whilst Amy and the Doctor go off to the mining facility. And it's here where the Doctor and Amy get introduced to Tony and Nashrish, and we're working on the mining facility as another crack happens on beneath the planet, and so Amy then gets sucked out, and Amy's aspect in the story is sadly kind of weak here in the first half of the episode. She basically is the damsel in distress, but our main characters are fighting for her protection and her safety. And basically the Doctor learns that as something is dragging him down, something is also coming up. As he scans the local area underneath the Earth, and you have these things coming up from the ground heat signals coming up to the surface. And Rory also gets introduced to Amber Rose and her son Elliot, the mother and son who we later learn is Tony's daughter and grandson, and also Mo's wife and son. So there's a very local family feeling to this story, which connects to a lot of Chris Chibnall stories. He kind of likes these kind of closed off family storylines, which we will later learn in his own televised era. But these characters feel really authentic and really real. But basically, by this point, it becomes a bus story. For those of you who don't know, bus stories are base under siege stories where you have a Doctor Who and a small local people basically being attacked by all fronts, and main part of the story is to defend themselves in some way, shape or form. And part one does become a bus kind of story. So, and because we only get a handful of characters, it means that each character gets to stand out and have some great little moments. Amber Rose believes that Rory was actually a police officer investigating the disappearance of corpses that in the local area. She was stating to Rory, who she thinks is a police officer, because he comes out of the TARDIS and thinks that it could be some sort of strange transport or his equipment or something. Basically tells him how her grandparents were buried in here and they've always wanted to be buried together. So when they redug the grave, they found that the first person who died in their family, their body had vanished and their coffin, and that it seemed to have disappeared and nobody knows where it is gone. It's kind of strange because this kind of plot, that kind of aspect doesn't really get brought up again. We are kind of left to assume that the Silurians took the corpse to experiment on, to examine, but it's never really brought up, and the fact that they never even returned the body is kind of strange. But it does kick off the plot, and this is also where Rory later on finds the Doctor after a massive force field takes place over the village, locking him off from the rest of the world, so they can't get any calls to call for backup or call for unit or for anything. And so our characters have to stay in a local church to fight off the alien invaders, or at least what they believe is the alien invaders at this point. And yeah, there's a lot of references here to Third Doctor stories if you haven't caught up. The fact that it is a Silurian story and does very similar things to Doctor Who and the Silurians is probably the obvious one, but you've also got a mining facility where the mining is causing a lot of the trouble. This is very similar to the story Inferno, another Third Doctor story. We also have a story with a force field trapping a small village, and the Doctor and his characters have to defend off and be located in a local church. Very similar to the Third Doctor story, The Daemons. Each of these stories, I would like to add, is also mentioned in my vlog series, so if you're interested in those, highly recommended if you're interested in those stories. In fact, just go watch them, because they're pretty great stories. But anyway, our characters here are very interesting. Amber Rose basically learns later on that her husband has been taken, and after an attack, her father is incredibly poisoned, and she becomes a very weak, emotional character. She is very vulnerable, and the story gives her enough breathing time that we can understand her mindset, her viewpoint, and why she would do the things she would do. And it's kind of strange, because I feel like if this was written by anyone else, she would be blamed as the villain. She would be pointed out as the villain, which she isn't. She's just a very vulnerable character, and our characters they are upset and annoyed by her actions, but she is but they do understand her point of view, and they still have an emotional connection to her. They just, it was a sign of weakness essentially. We also have Elliot, the son. Now, Elliot is such an interesting character because he's, for starters, for a kid actor who plays him, I believe his name is Samuel Davis. He does a surprisingly great job here. One of the best kid actors in Doctor Who, and we get some really great moments with him, with the bit where he's talking to Rory and he says the graves eat people. We have a moment where he's kind of nervous and he asks the Doctor, can you save my father? There's also a great moment, which I believe is like in like all the trailers, where he's like, are you scared of monsters? Have you fought monsters before? Yes. Are you scared of them? No, they're scared of me. Which is some great lines for the 11th Doctor. But importantly, or at least important to me anyway, the story does establish that he is dyslexic, which is the trouble of reading. And it is a very small little aspect to his character. It's never really brought up in terms of the plot. One of the first scenes that we see of him, he is with his father. It's actually, I think it's in the pre-credit sequence. And his father's trying to teach him to read. He's reading the Gruffalo. But he's struggling to read it, and he's also a huge fan of audiobooks. He loves novels, he just prefers listening to them than actually reading them. Now, why is that really important? It's not really, it's just a small little character beat for the narrative. However, I am someone who's dyslexic themselves. I also have trouble reading, and the fact this story brings it up, and you see his kind of struggles, but it's nothing that, there's never like a forcefully seen where the character has to like read to save the day or something. It's not, his dyslexia is something that's a part of him, but it's not something that defines him, and it's something that, not that he has to like combat it, but it's nothing, it's going to save the world or anything. And I personally really like that, because it just means that, just because we're dyslexic doesn't mean we have other things to not offer. I don't know. I just really, as somebody who is dyslexic, it is nice to see somebody who is dyslexic and isn't punished for the fact that they are dyslexic. This is something that Chris Chibnall will try to repeat with the character of Ryan Sinclair in his era of the show when he took up a showrunner. So that is really interesting in my opinion, and I actually like that. I don't know whether the general consensus is the same thing. I can imagine that could be a criticism to the story, that his dyslexia is brought up, seemingly part of the plot. However, nothing comes of it, which I can see that point of view, and if you do criticize the story for that, I do understand that. However, I personally like the fact that it wasn't like something he had to like fight or get over. It's just a part of his character, but he can offer more. Like, there's a great moment where the Doctor's basically training people to do these little jobs for him as the Silurians start attacking, and he makes a drawing, a map of the city, and the Doctor's just like, hey, see, dyslexia didn't stop Da Vinci or anybody else from achieving greatness. I don't know why. That always just brings a massive grin to my face. I don't know, I just love Elliot. But yeah, so the characters then, they basically know that the aliens are coming, so they come up with this plan. They first try to get visuals on every place, but however, when the Silurians, at this point we don't know the Silurians, come up to the surface of the Earth, they have an EMP, so all the technology has been disactivated. But the Doctor tries searching around in the darkness, and when he realizes that they're cold-blooded, realizes what they are. Also, in terms of canonical appearances, is this the first time the sonic sunglasses made an appearance? It has very similar properties to the sonic sunglasses. Yeah, they're the Sonic sunglasses. That's really mind-boggling that they were introduced here. They're not named here, but they basically have very similar properties to the 12th Doctor Sonic sunglasses. So yeah, they make their first canonical appearance here. That's my headcanon. I don't know if that's true, but it's my headcanon. And so they actually capture one of them. And so now each side has a hostage. And so the Doctor and Narcy, who really wants to go underneath the earth because she's just fascinated. It's her life work to get down to the drill. So, she's just curious. She has this curiosity and she wants to get to the earth. So she kind of becomes a surrogate companion. And they go down to the earth thanks to the help of the TARDIS. That scene where she's introduced into the TARDIS, and the Doctor is just so gleeful at her reaction, and they're giggling to each other. That's amazing little bit of acting right there. And so they go down to the centre of the Earth, and we get a pretty weak cliffhanger, if I'm going to say so myself, in which our characters are like, right, we're going to have to search for Amy. It shouldn't be too long. It's just a small little tribal group of Silurians. However, they discover that there's an entire civilization down here, an entire city's worth of catacombs, tunnels, and buildings. And that's the cliffhanger for part one, which is kind of weak. There's also scenes in which the Doctor, earlier on in the episode, he is interrogating the Silurian that they've captured, played here by Neva McIntosh, who also plays another Silurian in part two, and also as well becomes basically the default female Silurian. It's stated in here that the reason why the two women look the same is because they're sisters, they're twin sisters. But how does that work with the other Silurian that she plays in later episodes? Maybe Silurians just have a lot of twins. I don't know. But she basically becomes the default female Silurian of the revived series of Doctor Who. For good or ill, it's up to you. But she's a great actress, a great Scottish actress, and she does a fantastic job here. The makeup on her looks really well, and they first wear these masks, which again looks nothing like them. Supposedly it's supposed to be a reference to them, but they've got these weird grins and these big black googly eyes, and the Doctor takes off the mask to reveal a much more human defined face, and the Doctor tries to bargain with her, and there's a great moment in which she claims that she is the last of her race, but the Doctor is like, no you're not, no you're not. Do you know how I know? Because I'm the last of mine, and I know how it fits in the heart. So don't insult me. Let's talk about the 11th Doctor in this story, actually. There's a lot of moments where he's giggly and fun, and he is himself. He is the 11th Doctor we all know and love. He's very googly-eyed and very... got this child sense of awe about him when he's going around. But there's a lot of great serious moments with him. That moment after Amy gets captured, the moment where he basically has to comfort Rory when he tells him that Amy's been captured. That bit where he comforts the family, that he's going to get Elliot's father and Amber Rose's husband back. There's also a fantastic little moment in which Elliot is stuck outside, and the mother character is just like, where's my son? Who saw him last? And the Doctor basically is realizes that it was him. He was the last person he'd seen him, and that he let him go and get his headphones. And the mother's just like, you let him go on his own during these events? And you could see in Matt Smith. The scene doesn't really play much into the narrative, but you can see in Matt Smith's face that the Doctor feels internally guilty for what happened to Elliot, in which he gets captured by a Silurian afterwards, and that scene, man, that really sticks out in my mind as one of the great little moments. So let's talk about part two. because, like I said, the first half and the second half, in terms of a visual style, feel very different, which is very similar to a majority of stories in the Stephen Moffat era of the show, which gives each story its own variety of sense, meaning that you're never really bored going from one episode to another as you get a completely different visual style. And a similar thing happens here. We go from the little village in North Wales down to the underground caverns of the Silurian city, and there's some really great rocky environments with lots of mud, like tunneling, and you got a lot of these vines coming out from the ceilings. We also have this great hall that the Silurians appear in, and there's some really great moments in here. And the part 2 is easily better than part 1. As I've stated, as I've stated before in my vlog for Time and Angels and Flesh and Stone, Stephen Moffat as a writer usually prefers part 1s to part 2s. I feel like Chris Chibnall here prefers part 2 to part 1, because part 2 is easily better for the most part. When we basically have a remake of sorts to Silurians, to the Doctor Who and the Silurians from the 1970s. In fact, a lot of people can criticise the story for being a copy of that story, as we have Silurians. The Doctor tries to make peace with humans and Silurians. However, you have a human who basically defaults that truce, and as well as basically an evil Silurian who doesn't want to see peace with the humans and believes that they should come up to the surface and enslave humanity, or at least they should be utterly destroyed. It's their planet, after all. The humans, they were here first before humanity. What gives humans the right? But the Doctor tries to keep a bargain, which also plays into another aspect, which is a very popular story in the Third Doctor story, Third Doctor narratives, and that is the Doctor being the ambassador of two races fighting it out for each other. It's something that happens a lot during the Third Doctor era, and is mainly a standout in the story Doctor and the Silurians, and that's what happens here. But I feel like the story does offer plenty of differences, and I must be honest, I think it actually does the aspects a bit better than it does in Doctor and the Silurians, if I'm going to be honest. Despite the human-looking faces being very different to the Silurians of the classic era, I feel like it does mean that we can see more emotions. The actors are allowed to express more emotions with a great scene later on, which is a standout for the episode, and the actors and actresses get to really, bounce off each other, unlike the very limited facial expressions, or one facial expression of the classic Silurians design. Although with modern technology, you could make them more expressive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So the Doctor tries to get Amy and Narish to basically, they team up to basically become the ambassadors of Earth, and they meet up with basically the leader, the tribal leader, who has woken up after the scientists and the general. The general is also played by Neva McIntosh. They have a disagreement, and I love how the scientist starts off as sort of a villain. There's a really horrifying scene in which Amy meets up with Mo, and he's like, they dissected me whilst I was awake. That's kind of messed up. And Amy is about to, but the scientist gets distracted by something. But slowly throughout the episode, we learn that the scientist isn't really bad. He's just really fascinated by humans, and he's kind of an expert at his field, and he knows what he's doing. Like, he puts Elliot in suspended animation and studies him in a way that he will not be harmed. Still doesn't, Mo being dissected whilst being conscious is still really messed up, and I don't understand why. Like, they just added the fact he was dissecting and then they put them back together, fine. But the fact that he was conscious while doing it, that's really messed up. But the scientist becomes this small little lovable character, and when the doctor tries to get Mo and Elliot to reunite, and the scientist basically explains that why he did what he did, and it's just like, there's no harm, I don't hate the human, in fact I love them. I'm just really fascinated by them on a biological, because I'm a scientist and I just want to study. I didn't mean to cause harm. I do actually apologise if I cause any trouble. And he just has this really lovable face, and the doctor's just like, you know what, I really love you. That is just an amazing scene. I love that bit when Elliot wakes up and the father has to explain, it's like, I'm not going to lie, we're in the centre of the earth and we're surrounded by lizard people. Elliot turns around and you just see the scientist kind of like waving with this kind of presenter, a lovable presenting face. That is some really great acting. But the doctor, before he left for the Silurian city, gave an instruction to Rory and the gang up on the surface, Tony and Amber Rose, to keep their Silurian prisoner alive, so that they can make a bargain to swap their prisoners and they can sort out a mass peace. And it seems like it's all going good and well. However, Amber Rose starts panicking after her father, Tony, has been poisoned at one point in the story, and her son Elliot has been taken and she doesn't know what's happened to him, and her husband as well. So she's in a very vulnerable state, and she basically threatens to she keeps threatening people in a sense. She threatens to harm the Silurian to try and find an antidote. The Silurian is a warrior. She wants basically this battle to commence between the humans and the Silurians, and she kind of gives in and electrocutes her, which unintentionally kills her, put in this massive stud on the story. And I really love this because the story down in the centre of the earth still continues to be this very optimistic storyline, as our characters do not realise what has happened on the surface. Whilst on the surface they're like, right, we're completely messed up, there's no way we're going to get a bargain out of this. The best we could do is bring back their body, bring back their dead, and just hope for forgiveness. And I love that Rory is the one, our characters, Tony and Amber Rose, they're like, right, we can't go down there. If we give down the body, they will kill us on sight. But Rory is just like, it's the decent thing to do. At least we can give them the body of one of their own back. And I love that scene when they come down to the surface of the underground place, and it seems to be everything fine. They're talking fine and happily, and then they bring over the body, and the doctor's like, something's wrong. And when he realizes, and when he takes over the towel and it reveals the dead Silurian, you can see in the doctor's face, it's not going to go well. And all that hope, all that dreams, was completely crushed in that moment. And my God, and then it kind of, again, like it becomes of a remake, as Amber Rose basically has made this plan before they left that the drill is about to start reactivating and destroy, or at least become harmful to the village, to the civilization underground. And so the military, run by the female Silurian, who we later down learn is the sister of the one that was captured. And that scene, this is what I was on about the facial expressions being the human facial expressions actually is an improvement on the Silurians, in which she sees her sister dying and she just tears up, she cries. You really relate to that. You really like, oh my God, these are people, these are individuals who care and love for each other, and it's because of that they are afraid of humanity, and we just proved why. And so, despite her coming off kind of really mustache twirling, she constantly does these speeches. It's like, we will destroy the apes. We will destroy the apes for the age of Earth and reclaim our land. You do kind of understand her point of view because, you know, it is kind of her planet to begin with. And this scene kind of pushes her over the edge to the point where she summons an entire army's worth of people to basically overthrow the humans in this situation. And basically all hell breaks loose. And the Doctor basically rescues everybody. There's this great fun action scene as the Doctor basically tries to make a deal with the leader of the Silurian, who sees that they're not ready to arrive yet, so he's going to send a signal which will put all the Silurians back in suspended animation in the hopes that one day Earth will be ready. And the Doctor makes the promise to everybody else that, right, make a promise to the best of humanity. And Tony and Narish stay with the Silurians, decided to stay in the hibernation as Tony is poisoned, and Narish, we quickly learn, and Tony are kind of this couple. So that is it's just a really nice little scene right there. And I really like Narish. I feel Tony was easily the weakest of the characters. But I really like Narish, and I really like that scene where she stays and she's like, I was digging and I finally found what I wanted for. I dug, and what I found it is thing. And yeah, you're going to destroy my drill so that there's no chance that the Silurians will be harmed. But, you know, now I don't need that. I've got my love of my life, and I'm going to stay with him, and hopefully we will find a cure. And we will, you know, appear in the future together. So thank you, Doctor, and I'm going to stay. And so our characters start running, and then here is where I start having a mental breakdown and start screaming at my screen. Yes, I seem to be really enjoying this story, wasn't I? Until something happened. For those of you who might not know what I'm on about, let me backtrack. The Stephen Moffat era overall has a trademark, shall we say, of stories being nice singular stories, and then all of a sudden the storyline, the plot line comes into focus and basically distracts us from the story. This has happened before in the two-parter Times of Angels and Flesh and Stone, and it's happening here again. Our characters start running into the TARDIS as the Doctor gets everybody in apart from Rory and Amy, and they discover that in this tunnel where the TARDIS has landed, there's another crack in time. And the Doctor realises, like, how the hell this could be here. And as soon as that crack appears, the story stops being a story. This scene becomes a massive teaser for the finale. As Rory gets killed, he gets shot by the Silurian, Neva McIntosh's general character, who has been poisoned after all the rest of the Silurians have been decontaminated and put in suspended animation. And she shoots at the Doctor, but Rory gets in the way. And that's a really sad, this could have been a really sad, emotional death scene for Rory. Despite I feel like it was really early on in the series, but it's clearly he wasn't killed to bring any emotional weight. He wasn't killed because Rory had his heroic moment in which he saved the Doctor. It's to set up the plot line as his body starts getting taken by the energy source of the crack in time. As earlier on the Doctor puts his hand in the crack and retrieves something, a bit of shrapnel from this explosion in time and space. But Rory's body gets captured by this light, and the Doctor has to basically pull Amy. Karen Gillan's acting here is phenomenal, and she really comes into her own here. You really feel bad when the Doctor's trying to keep her to remember, and she's remembering all the things. We get these clips, and there's this great moment where you see like a little faded images of Rory on the other side of the screen. And then the TARDIS kind of like crashes, and it distracts her just enough that she completely forgets Rory, as Rory's part of her timeline. So when the crack in time takes away Rory, it takes away her memories of Rory, as Rory now never existed within the timeline. And the Doctor feels emotionally sad by this. And yeah, the problem with this is that it's a nice, enjoyable, emotional scene, but it takes me out of the story because it has nothing to do with the story it's telling. It's to do with the crack in time, which is just this scene that feels like it's a bubble in the episode, and it's really distracting, and it's really clear that this was part of Stephen Moffat pushing this storyline into the adventures. I can almost imagine Chris Chibnall writing a ending that he was really happy and satisfied with, and then Stephen Moffat kind of took the script, ripped out the last few pages, added this in, and then it was like, yeah, okay, this is the version that we're going to air, which kind of really distracts from the ending. And I also love how the characters who went in the TARDIS before our main characters, they kind of like disappear, presumably just to explore the TARDIS, and appear just as soon as this little bubble of the narrative ends. And so we have a scene in which the Doctor's talking to Amber Rose, and it's a very lovely scene where he's kind of like, at that moment you are the worst in humanity, but don't threat. You can still raise Elliot and teach him not to be like you in that moment. Teach him to be the best of humanity like you wasn't at that time. But says it in a way which kind of feels a little bit humbling, as if like he understands her point of view. What she did was horrible and is disgusting, but she can do better. She can learn to teach better through Elliot, and teach him to be much better in person than she ever could have been. But, it's really nice and sweet. And so the Doctor has this very like somber moment where Amy seems to be very cheerful and godly. She looks at her future self, paying off the little scene right at the start. She's waving goodbye to her future self, and she's like, I thought I saw someone else there. And the Doctor feels sad. He respected Rory and is sad by the fact his best friend at this point in the series has forgotten about the love of her life. But again, that doesn't really tie into what the story is about. He's not sad because the peace between humanity and Silurians didn't work out. He's sad because of Rory's death, which is that has nothing to do with his narrative and is very distracting. And so the Doctor looks at the shrapnel that he picked out from the TARDIS, revealing itself to be a piece of the TARDIS exterior. The TARDIS is the cause of the explosion that will fracture space-time. And so the Doctor's on the run from, now knows essentially what is about to happen. Why then doesn't the Doctor immediately investigate and the finale immediately takes place? It's again really distracting onto the overall series. There's no real, just the criticisms of Series 5 that, the story now has to have the Doctor kind of forget about the whole piece of the TARDIS being captured, being part of this explosion, just so he can still have more fun adventures until we get to the finale. But yeah, that is Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. Overall, the majority, 99% of the story is really well handled, really great. There is a criticism that the story tries way too hard to be Doctor Who and the Silurians, essentially a remake of that story. And though I feel like in certain aspects it's a lot better than that story, the fact that it is literally a copy and paste of that plot line can be considered a criticism. But there's also some really nice other references to the third. It feels like a love letter to the Third Doctor era. If you're a fan of the Third Doctor era like myself, you're going to have a lot of fun. You're going to have a lot of blast in this story. However, for me anyway, that ending with the crack was really distracting and really took me out of it. And hindered what could have been one of the best stories in the series of Series 5. But sadly, that crack in time really distracted me. And the fact that it's such a pivotal moment in the series, showing the death of Rory and seeing him being wiped out from existence, means that this is kind of like this really strange scene where it's really necessary, but it's also not necessary to the plot that this story is trying to tell. Yeah, I know I'm going on a tangent on it, but overall, the story is very good, very well handled. I highly recommend it. It's easily Chris Chibnall's best script before he took on the show showrunner in terms of his Doctor Who work. Maybe he's done some other great stories. He's done some great stories in Torchwood. Some of his best work is in the latter half of his Torchwood era, but this is easily his best story, which he didn't show run in the series of the main series itself. So there you go. That is Cold Blood and Hungry Earth. So join me next time where we go back to the K9 crew, and something happens because I haven't watched the episode. I don't know what it's about. So join me next time for Ouroboros, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!